Hello and welcome. It's Moving Through Menopause, and I'm here today with Martha Tettenborn, and I'm really excited to chat with her. You know, Martha has written a really fabulous book, and so we're going to talk all about the book. But first of all, let's meet Martha. Martha is a registered dietitian, and she's in Ontario, Canada, by the Great Lakes, which just sounds so fabulous. Martha, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. Not quite so exciting in Lincolnshire, I have to say, but we make the best of it. And
It sounds exotic to me.
well, you were just telling me about your heritage. Your dad coming from Cumbria, did you say?
Yeah, the Cumberland, like the Lakes District, is what I
Yeah, yeah,
understand. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He was Graham, a good say Lowland Scots name, and then I married a German, got a name that nobody can spell, but oh well.
Oh, well, it could be worse, as we say. So we're talking today about a personal journey that you made, but also something that was tied up with your professional interest in nutrition. And so we are talking about ovarian cancer, and we know that this is something that half of women over 60, half of ovarian cancer cases are found in women over 63. And although menopause doesn't cause ovarian cancer, your chances of developing it do get more as you get older. I mean, that's kind of true for lots of things. But ovarian cancer is definitely something that we want to prick our ears up and learn about, because it is one of those conditions that can be sitting there silent and we know nothing about it. So tell me first of all a little bit about your journey as a nutritionist, a registered dietitian, and your interest in ketogenesis, and you know where that all started.
Sure. So, so I'm Canadian. I am a registered dietitian, and I graduated back in the mid '80s. So you can do the math. It was a long time ago. It was in the middle of the the cutting edge information on low fat diets that was coming out of the US at that time, the McGovern Commission and the dietary guidelines for Americans that ended up being adopted by basically every Western civilization out there. And so I have practiced in Ontario for over 35 years, I think it is. It's hard to say now. But I've spent the last 20 years in gerontology, working in long-term care with frail seniors. I love my work with seniors. I love working with people, helping them to stay awesomely well. But I also decided that I wanted to get into helping people to age well and to stay healthy as they get older, because I saw a lot of chronic disease, and then I saw some people who were just incredible, just hitting their 90s and beyond and still so well. So I started looking, and as a personal thing, I planned to age awesomely. That was I've always said I plan to live to 95 and die with my boots on. Probably hiking boots, possibly motorcycle boots, who knows? But so I was doing investment probably over the last 10 years or so. I've moved further and further away from the standard diet and more into a low carbohydrate, healthy fats, more ancestrally focused sort of diet, and a less processed sort of diet. So I've done a lot of research, and I've done some extra certification to become a primal health coach in low carb nutrition. And then I started a private practice doing that as well about 5 years ago now. And that was not well accepted in my small Ontario community. Like, I didn't get any support from the local doctors or anything. People are fine, but the doctors wouldn't refer to me or anything. So it was a bit of a hard slog. But then in 2018, in the summer of 2018, is when I discovered that I had a huge ovarian cyst that turned out to be ovarian cancer. And I put the practice pretty much on the back burner at that point to make room in my life for cancer. And I haven't really restarted the practice in its previous iteration, I've sort of pivoted into the whole cancer metabolism and cancer nutrition field, which is why we're here, what we'll talk about.
That is entirely why we're here. And, this story for you began, and I kind of liked the story, that it began when you were trying to do some planking. And obviously, planking as a Pilates teacher and yoga teacher, that's, something that I do on a regular basis. So, and it is, like we said, something that women can be have in the bodies without even knowing it. A space occupying lesion can get really quite big before we actually begin to notice it. And it was when you were lying on your front, I think you must have been recovering from doing the plank, when you were lying flat on your front and you felt that you had something taking up space inside your body. Is that how it began?
Well, it began because I got a text message from my girlfriend, one of my best friends. She lives about 5 hours away, and she had been doing some serious exercise because she had a really awesome fitness goal, which was to become a monkey at the racetrack. And a monkey is a person in full body armor who holds onto a sidecar of a racing motorcycle and provides the counterweight for the racing bike.
Yeah.
So they are just on a platform with like a bar to hold on to, and they have to counterweight all of the twists and curves on the track. It's an incredibly physically demanding thing. And she was in her late 50s at this point, same as me. And this is what she wanted to do. She has raced motorcycles, so it wasn't as far out there as it sounds. But she was doing all kinds of exercise, and she was aiming for a 2-minute plank. And I had been inspired by that when I saw her in the spring. So she sent me a message in about mid-July of 2018 and said, "So what are you up to on your plank?" And I said, well, this is a text message. So it's like, "Ooh, haven't done one of those in a while." So I literally just got off the sofa and laid on the living room floor. I wasn't recovering from the plank. I hadn't even gone to the plank yet. I had just laid down on the carpet. And the moment I laid on the carpet, there was something hard in my lower abdomen. It was like I was laying on an egg or something. It was so bizarre. It had never been there before. And immediately I just knew there was something wrong. So I kind of, felt around a bit. And then I sat up and I called my doctor and said, "There's something there. I need to come in and see you." So about 5 days later, I got an ultrasound, and the ultrasound showed that I had a very large ovarian cyst. It was just a very simple fluid-filled sac that had grown on the ovary. And it was about 15 centimeters across already. So that's about 6 inches. Yeah, it was huge. But it was fluid filled. It was very simple. I was referred to a gynecologist because it was going to have to come out. It was too big to ignore. But it was summer, she was on a month's holidays, and I saw her replacement, and, summer's pretty short and precious in Canada. So, anyways, it took about 2 months before I finally got it removed. It had continued to grow during that time until the cyst was above the level of my belly button. So I was literally having to sit down and pull my pants up over my waist, up over the bump, almost like you're like mid pregnancy. And I couldn't move like I had to stop running. I had just started running again that summer, which I love. And I had to stop that. I had to stop anything that involved, bumping and grinding. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, that too. Because if it ruptured, it would have been awful, right? I mean, small ovarian cyst rupturing can cause acute, excruciating pain. But this thing was like enormous, right? So I had it removed about 2 months after I first found it, and it contained 1.5 liters of fluid at that point. So yeah, it was if you think about the size of a carton of milk or something like that. Yeah, it was a big. But I had it done laparoscopically because there was no indication it was cancer. There is a blood test for a marker for ovarian cancer, and I had that test done, and it was only marginally elevated, like just barely above the normal range. So nobody thought it was cancer. None of the doctors did. So I decided to have a laparoscopic surgery, with the little incisions, and they ruptured this thing inside me and sucked the fluid out, and then pulled out this deflated cyst and took out both ovaries and both fallopian tubes. And 6 days later, when I was sitting at home, I got another phone call from the surgeon and her office. And they said, the surgeon wants to see you. Come tomorrow morning, bring your husband. And I mean, I work in healthcare. I know what that means. It's just
that means,
it's not good. So that's when I found out it was cancer, and I had to start down that path of being referred to an oncologist. And so, yeah, it was a very, I compare it to an elephant that, kind of, it's the elephant in the room. It sort of drops into your living room and takes up all the available space and just pushes everything else to the edges when you get a cancer diagnosis. It's pretty all consuming for sure.
Yeah, I have my own kind of experience of that, but by proxy with my young son, if you remember.
Yeah.
When he was just one, he was diagnosed with a tumor attached to his sacrum. Similarly, that was occupying space in his body, but it wasn't filled with fluid as it goes. Anyway, he's healthy now, but we did have the chemotherapy journey that I know you then ultimately you had to embark upon that.
Yeah.
And it's what can we do? The thing is, we know we've got to go through this conventional treatment approach. We know it's really exhausting, draining. We're going to be ill. We know this is coming.
It's poison. So, chemo is poison.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, there you are. It's poison. And so it was for me, I was just observing this and nursing my son, and it was everything I could do to help. What could I do to help? And the only thing I could think of was food, nourishment, how can we manage that? But you took it to a whole nother level with your research, I have to say. And so this is the piece that is absolutely fascinating, that it was really around optimizing the outcome of this treatment for yourself. And minimizing the side effects and all the consequences of the chemotherapy poison that you're having to have put inside your body. And so, this is what you know so much more about than I do. And I'd love if you would tell me whatever you can tell me.
Yeah. Well, as a dietitian, trained in the 80s and trained in the standard method, and the way dietitians are still being trained, I might say, is that really we didn't think there was anything that we could do nutritionally for cancer as an entity, other than to kind of prevent people from losing weight or dealing with the consequences of the treatment, which was horrible nausea, emesis, weight loss, in advanced cancer, cachexia, that kind of thing. So it was just about trying to support them through the treatment with enough calories that they didn't lose weight. That was really all we knew. And so we used what we called a high energy, high protein diet. And that involved making the diet as nutrient dense as you could, or as calorie dense, really. We weren't even concerned about nutrients, but as calorie dense as you could in the smallest volumes, so that people could get calories. So, the classic example is you can make a piece of toast, which is about 80 calories. Then you can butter the toast. Then you put peanut butter on the toast. Then you put jam on top of the peanut butter. And by the time you're done, it's still only one piece of toast, but you're up to about 300 calories. And so that kind of density is what, we were using. And we were using sugar and honey and syrups and fats and creams and things like that to try and get those extra calories in. That was all we knew. But I also know that, having already been a bit of a renegade by heading off into this low carb realm, that there was a lot more to nutrition than what I had learned. And so I went diving into the information around cancer and what could I do? Is there anything I could do? And holy crap, I found all kinds of stuff I could do. Like there's this whole approach to cancer, or there's this whole field of knowledge about the metabolism of cancer that has really only been rediscovered in the last 20 years or so. It was being researched in the 1920s and the 1930s. And a lot of work was done back then with cancer. But a lot of the really groundbreaking work was done in Germany. And a lot of it had to do with, among other things, the fact that Adolf Hitler was terrified of cancer. His mother died of cancer. And so he was very supportive as he rose through the power structure in Germany. He was very supportive of cancer research. And so there was there's a lot of factors. It's a fascinating story. It has recently just been published in a book called Ravenous by Sam Apple. It tells the story of Otto Warburg and the research that was done in Germany to look at metabolism, and particularly metabolism of cancer and how it was different. In fact, Otto Warburg won a Nobel Prize for his work in metabolism. Not specifically cancer necessarily, but in metabolism and describing it. So that whole field of nutrition around cancer and metabolism around cancer was lost after the war. Among other things, Watson and Crick described the DNA, the double helix of DNA. They were able to talk about, what genetic material was, and it became obvious very quickly that cancer has damaged genetic material. So the entire machinery of the cancer industry switched over to this genetic approach to cancer and basically just left metabolism on the dustbin of history. But in the last 20 years, that area has been kind of rediscovered, and there's some researchers doing some really amazing work in cancer metabolism descriptions and how cancer's metabolism is broken and different. It's not broken. It works for cancer. It's not the way our healthy cells do it. But because it's different, it's possibly something that can be impacted. And because it's metabolism, we're talking about fuel and how you fuel your body. And when you're talking about fuel, you're talking about food. So we're back to nutrition, which is kind of where I nerd out. So I got going on all this stuff, and it's like, holy cow, there are things that I can do that are already in the area of nutrition that I am passionate about, which is the low carb, healthy fats, ancestral eating sort of stuff, that will actually impact on cancer and help me and help to, make it more difficult for cancer to grow.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was really fascinating to think that, we know these cells multiply at an exponential rate, and so you can influence that rate of reproduction. And so it was partly about the cancer cells, and then it was also about the healthy cells, you were telling me too.
Yes. So I was strongly encouraged to take chemotherapy. I didn't have a tumor in my body, which is different from a lot of people's situation, right? Where they take chemo to shrink a tumor before they have surgery. My tumor was out, but because they had ruptured the cyst, there was the chance that this was called a spill. And so there was a chance that the cancer cells could be loose in my abdominal cavity. And so it was very strongly encouraged that I have a second surgery to the full hysterectomy, and I had to have a port placed that would deliver one chemo drug down right into my abdomen. So they actually drained one of the drugs directly into my abdominal cavity, because that's where this kind of cancer likes to hang out and stick and grow new tumors around your pelvic and abdominal space. So I had this second surgery, and I was going to be starting into chemo. Now, I mean, I have been so healthy. I've had like 0 surgeries my entire life. I take 0 medications, like nothing. I'm so drug naive. I was terrified of taking the chemo. I really was. So I started looking into some of these cancer metabolism researchers, and among other people, I found the work of Dr. Walter Longo, who's a longevity researcher in California, but he had done a lot of work using fasting and looking at its impact on cancer growth and on chemotherapy in particular.
Wow.
And what he determined, and what I kind of built out of what I read of his research, and other people, but he was kind of the one in terms of chemo, was that your healthy cells are capable of burning a variety of fuels. We're metabolically flexible, that we can burn sugar or carbohydrates, we can burn fatty acids, we can burn ketone bodies, which is our body's own alternative to glucose because it's a water-soluble fuel substrate. And we burn them in the mitochondria, which are the little powerhouses that are inside all of our cells. But cancer's mitochondria, most of the time, is damaged. And cancer seems to choose, or has become, very adept at metabolizing sugar in a different process, a much more ancient process that takes place in the fluid of the cell, in the cytoplasm. So it's actually more like a fermentation process, and it will take glucose and it will break it down into lactic acid. And so it's also kind of a dirty fuel sort of process, as opposed to mitochondrial respiration, where we actually, like, the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water. So very clean burning fuel, and a much more efficient process. Fermentation is much less efficient in terms of how much fuel it produces or how much energy it produces, but it's very fast. It's instant. Right? We all are capable of doing it. If we have an adrenaline rush, that fight or flight, that fuel that gets your muscles moving instantly to, evade the tiger or whatever, or the speeding train, or, whatever it is you're jumping out of the way of, that energy is that cytoplasmic fermentation, right? And when you burn energy in the absence of oxygen, such as when you're sprinting, and you get that lactic acid burn in your muscles, that's exactly what that is as well. Okay. So by changing our fuel, by fasting in particular, you can actually make your healthy cells kind of quiet down. They changes their metabolism into kind of a maintenance cleanup sort of mode, where they're not actively, they're not metabolizing as fast. But cancer has no off switch. It's one of the hallmarks of cancer, that it doesn't have any ability to downregulate itself in response to fuel supply. So if you cut off the fuel supply, it just gets really stressed. Doesn't have the sugar it needs, because your blood sugar's low when you eat low carb or keto or fast. And it doesn't have the insulin circulating, which is a growth factor for it, because your blood sugar's low. So cancer cells are stressed. And then while they're stressed, the idea is that then you hit them with something that that becomes more effective or more potent because of them being stressed. So that's the chemo or the radiation or high dose vitamin C intravenously or hyperbaric oxygen. There's a variety of things that can be used to be the punch. So, yeah.
I think it's kind of counterintuitive, as you say, to fast when going through that process. And I certainly remember the sort of high fat, calorie dense foods that they were trying to encourage my son to eat when he was going through all this. So it is a little bit counterintuitive, but I know that this is something that you worked to develop, a clear window of fasting, and so it's it is, as you say, a fasting protocol that you've built in contrast with the idea that we're trying to get calories in as much as we can.
I know. And you go to the chemo clinic and they walk around with butterscotch candies and starchy little cookies, and if you ask for a drink, it's ginger ale. Like, it's sugar upon sugar upon sugar upon sugar. And I realize that they are expecting everybody to feel nauseous, and that's why they provide those things. But it's just sugar. It's all feeding it's all feeding the cancer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I think you told me that your symptoms associated with the chemo were actually quite mild.
Oh, yes, amazingly so. I mean, and that's not at all what's expected with the kind of chemo that I was getting. I was on paclitaxel and carboplatin, which are two, fairly significant chemo drugs. One, they were both administered at the same time, once every 3 weeks, and I had 6 rounds. And I had said to my doctor, like, hit me with your best shot. I only plan to do this once. I don't want to have to come back. So, it was the normal, like the full on dose. And so for each of the actual chemo treatments, I fasted for 36 hours prior to the treatment, and then 24 hours after the treatment. What that did was that downregulated my healthy cells into a quiet mode, and kept them there for the period of time. So they went into quiet mode prior to the chemo, and then during the chemo and for the 24 hours after, they stayed in that quiet mode. And that stressed the cancer cells. But what it does is, chemo is this, let's say it's a poisonous drug. The idea is to kill the cancer before you kill the person, right? So by downregulating my healthy cells, the chemo literally couldn't find it, because chemo is a bit of a blunt weapon in a lot of cases. It is targeted at the symbol or the signals of fast metabolism, because cancer can't turn off. So it's always got this fast metabolism, these growth factors and stuff that, so the chemo goes into your system and it heads for those cells that are exhibiting the fast metabolism. So if you can quiet your own cells, I call it stealth mode, right? Where you literally put your own cells into stealth mode, the chemo literally doesn't find them. And so you don't get the side effects in the parts of your body that are normally more rapidly metabolizing.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah. So if you think about an adult, we don't have a lot of active growth going on, right? Because we're grown. We're not like your son or, pediatric or even adolescent cases. But as adults, we don't have a lot of growth happening. So the parts of our body that get hit with chemotherapy are the ones that are still actively in a growth phase. So, I mean, the one that everyone knows the most is hair, right? Your hair follicles are always growing. Your skin is always producing new skin cells. The lining of your GI tract, all the way from your mouth to your back end, is always regenerating fresh cells. And your bone marrow is always putting out new blood components, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. A lot of your immune system cells are created in your bone marrow. So those are the parts of your body that really get hit up hard with chemo. And by putting those things into stealth mode, what I found personally, and this was borne out by some of the case studies and the work that Dr. Walter Longo did, is that I had very few side effects from my chemo, and that each chemo treatment got less severe in terms of side effects than the one before. And that is totally opposite to what they expect. Because they expect each one to be cumulatively worse than the one before. I had minimal nausea. I never threw up. I never missed a meal unless I was fasting. I never missed making a meal. I mean, I'm the cook in my house and I like it that way. I'm in control. Right?
Yes, that's the way.
It's my kitchen. And sometimes it was just bacon and eggs, but I would get out of the chair and I was never horizontal. I was never spending days in bed, nothing like that. I had a recliner, like a electric power recliner that I could be in the middle of the living room. I was knitting, I was watching movies, whatever. I'd get up and I'd maybe walk out to the end of the mailbox and, at the end of the driveway, get the mail. I'd walk, I'd empty the dishwasher, make a meal, whatever. And then when I was tired, I'd climb back into my chair. And I would do that for maybe 4 days after each treatment. And then I could feel my energy coming back up. And then for about 2 weeks, I'd have pretty much awesomely normal. Wow. And I was still at one of my jobs. So I was working a couple of days a week. And it was amazing that I felt as good as I did in the middle of chemo. Like, it was really amazing. And that's what I so desperately want everyone else to have, is to be able to, number one, feel empowered, like you still have some control over this horrible situation. But also that you don't have to go through being flat out. You don't have to go through the misery. You don't have to go through the vomiting and the mouth sores. And peripheral neuropathy was the one that I was totally terrified of, which is nerve damage to your extremities, your fingers and toes. I mean, I see people coming into the chemo clinic with a walker because their feet just weren't really working right. And people would get numbness and stuff. And I thought, like, I type for a living, in my work. I have to, everything's electronic record, so you're typing all the time. And I knit for relaxation. Like, that's my mental happy place. And it's like, I can't lose those things, right? So nothing. I had none of that stuff. The only issue I got into in any way really significantly was a bit of constipation after the first chemo treatment. And that was my own fault, because I kept thinking, oh, well, I haven't gone, but I trust my body. It's always been fine before. Yeah, no, it wasn't fine. But then again, I problem solved that myself using, I developed a keto flax psyllium bread that I could use as a super sort of high fiber supplement to help, that fit it within the strict keto diet that I was following for that whole 4 months. And that took care of things. Like, as long as I stayed on that, a couple of slices of that bread every day, I was fine. I made it through. So I never got into that mess again. But yeah, that was it pretty much for side effects.
I suppose the thing that maybe some people are not overly familiar with is what is the keto? What can you eat? What can't you eat? What does that look like?
Well, it's interesting. A ketogenic diet is a diet that puts your body into ketosis. It can be anything, but it puts your body into a state of ketosis. And what that means is that your blood sugar is dropped low enough that your body senses that it's low, and it takes fatty acids from your fat stores, when we all love the idea of using up our fat stores. And it takes them to the fatty acids to the liver, and then it creates these small chemical molecules called ketones. They're water soluble, which fatty acids are not. And they can be plugged right into the fuel system of our bodies, the mitochondria, and go through the same metabolic pathways as the carbohydrates. And the important thing for ketones in particular is that they can cross the blood-brain barrier and fuel your brain beautifully. Brains are happy working on ketones. In fact, this is why a ketogenic diet was developed in the 1920s as a treatment for epilepsy.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so before the days of epileptic drugs, intractable epilepsy could be treated with a ketogenic diet, which is an extremely low carbohydrate diet that would cause the body to fuel itself almost entirely on ketones, and literally it would heal brains. Like, it still does. In fact, it was kind of, again, dustbin of history, because the medications were developed for epilepsy. But there's lots of epilepsy that isn't amenable to even the best of the drugs, and the drugs have terrible side effects. So using a keto diet was actually rediscovered in, I think it was the 80s, late 70s or early 80s, by Jim Abramson, who's a famous Hollywood producer or director, I'm not sure. Anyways, he had a son with intractable epilepsy, and they discovered this diet approach, and they started a whole foundation called the Charlie Foundation, which has been instrumental in advocating for and getting reestablished the whole dietary epilepsy connection. So yeah, so your brain's really happy on ketones, but diet-wise, anything that creates that situation where your body's going to make ketones is a keto diet. But the traditional keto diet, the way it is in the popular press, is mostly animal-based foods, so meats and mostly fermented or low carbohydrate dairy products. So not fresh milk, for example, but things like heavy cream or cheeses, where the milk sugar has been removed or has been already fermented out. But meat, fish, poultry, eggs, and then lots of vegetables, low carbohydrate vegetables, and a few low carbohydrate fruits or lower carbohydrate fruits. So a moderate amount of, usually berries is the most common one. Yeah, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, that kind of thing. So what's not in a keto diet will be any sort of sugar, and most of the grains. So wheat and wheat products, which is, your bread, cereals, crackers, cookies, all that kind of stuff. Biscuits, I guess you would call them. Cookies in Canada, biscuits in
biscuits,
UK. Yep. Rice, potatoes. So a lot of the super starchy things, oats, barley, all that kind of stuff. I know. So those are just too high in carbohydrates to fit within the guidelines of a keto diet. There are variations on that sort of basic idea, but the other thing that has become obvious, it's really, really important, just in the last few years, is the fats that you use. Because when you don't use carbohydrate for energy, a keto diet is high in fat, but it has to be a healthy fat. It has to be a kind that nature has built, not a factory. Yeah. So that's animal products or plant fats that have just been pressed as is out of the fruit of a plant, usually, which would be olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, not seed oils or soya oils or any of those industrially produced oils. They are incredibly inflammatory for the body. Yeah. And standard nutrition got that wrong for about 40 years. I mean, since the 1980s, and even before, we've been pushing polyunsaturated fats and these industrial seed oils, and they are so unhealthy. If everybody does nothing else out of this podcast, throw out the margarine, throw out the Crisco, get some real butter, real lard, life will be better.
Yeah, because I know the ketogenic diet has been criticized from the perspective of the high fat and the potential for was it heart disease they were worried about? So
yeah, high cholesterol. But the whole cholesterol fat theory has really been debunked. It was a very politically motivated thing, and like I say, it came out of the 1960s, 70s, 80s. A few people were really instrumental to pushing it through, and they're very charismatic people. And so the government ended up adopting it as a national policy. And then, of course, all other, the Canadian and Australian and UK and everybody else has decided that this had to be the right science, but it really wasn't. We were wrong. Cholesterol, they describe cholesterol as being like the firemen at the scene of a fire. They didn't cause the fire. They're there to deal with the fire. Cholesterol didn't cause the heart disease or the plaques or the problems. It's basically the Band-Aid. It's there, at the scene of the crime because it's there to help, not because it is the cause, right? Inflammation is the cause. And cholesterol gets kind of racked into, being present at the scene of the crime sort of thing.
And I mean, I know that fasting can be anti-inflammatory too in its nature. So you combined your ketogenic diet when you were eating and then a fasting protocol. But did you mention something about bone broth, or did I dream that?
No, you didn't. No, it wasn't a full water fast that I did. It was a supported, fast. I call it a supported fast. I had, non-caloric beverages, basically. Coffee, and I happen to drink it black already, so that was easy. Tea, herbal tea, water. And I would use, over the course of 72 hours, I'd use about 3 cups of bone broth, so about 750 mils or so. Mostly the day before, because the day before chemo, you still feel really, really good, which means that you've got a good appetite and you're hungry, right? So the bone broth, when you heat it up, and particularly it's a really good delivery method for salt, which your body needs when you're fasting.
Right.
And so it feels like a meal. You could warm it up, and I could sit and have my cup of bone broth with my husband while he's having his meal, sort of thing. The day of chemo, you feel kind of so I didn't find I even needed any bone broth the day of chemo. And then usually the day after, appetite's not great, but by the third day, I'm going to eat supper that night. So I just need to make it through the day. But usually, yeah, between 2 and 3 cups of bone broth. And I would make my own. It's easy to make. And you can buy it if you don't have the time or energy to make it. But get a good quality one if you can, not just the powdered soup based stuff. Like actually get some bones, throw them in a crock pot. Instant pots. Do you have the Instant Pot in the UK? That electric pressure cooker.
Well, yeah, pressure cooker. I don't know.
But nowadays they're all electronic and they're like idiot proof and yeah.
They're not going to explode in your face.
Yeah, those ones. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I bought one of those because I can make bone broth in about 2 hours and it doesn't stink up my house. Yeah. Yeah. My husband had a aversion to waking up at 7 in the morning and the whole house smells like bone broth because it's been cooking on the stove all night or in the crock pot. And he didn't like that. So I got one of these Instant Pots and they're amazing. I can make bone broth in a couple hours and yeah, they make a good bone broth. So
well, and I know you've got amazing tips, and so you put all these into a book.
I did, yes.
I know, and this, I love this that you took something that was a tragic, negative personal experience, and you've turned it into a positive outcome, which is you gave birth to this book, and you know what, the beginning part that I read, the story, of you and your mom actually as well, and your journey through this this terrible diagnosis was very engaging. I like a novel. I could have sat there and failed to put it down if I wasn't careful. It was so well written. So thank you for doing this. I know it's got recipes and lots of wonderful information. Did it take a lot of work to put it together? Or?
Well, I started with a blog because I had been looking for other people's stories when I started. And like I say, when I found this whole area, I just thought the world needs to know this. So I started a blog, and then some of my friends kind of said, you write really well. You should maybe think about a book. And so I started, I just put an outline together and then I just started putting the chunks together. So the book is called Hacking Chemo because it's not about curing cancer. It's about surviving chemo in a really empowered, badass sort of way, right? And so it's Hacking Chemo using ketogenic diet, therapeutic fasting, and a kick-ass attitude to power through cancer. Yeah. And so it kind of addresses all those areas. It's the first part is my story. There's also a good ketogenic diet kind of primer, how to do it, and how to get into it. Because you don't go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, Yeah, you have to kind of work your way into it. The theories and the reasons why the chemo is impacted and cancer is impacted by metabolism and fasting and stuff. Then the chemo fasting protocol itself and a variety of recipes that I found helpful, particularly because during chemo, a lot of times, but when you're not feeling well, you often want comfort food. So there's comfort food versions of a lot of things that fit within a keto diet. There's breads and a granola recipe and cracker recipe and mac and cheese type thing that uses cauliflower instead of noodles and that kind of stuff, so that it feels like comfort food. You're not stuck eating like a piece of meat when you don't feel like eating like a piece of meat, right?
Yeah. You may not feel like chewing on a steak at that moment.
And it's all evidence-based and referenced, so it's not weird and out there. And I'm not ever saying that this is, a cure for cancer or that it is that it's going to be, you know, like the be all and end all, or the forever. There's also a section in there on, you know, living the rest of your life after chemo, because I don't live a keto diet life. Like that's not where I live on an ongoing basis. I live a mostly clean, animal based, whole food sort of based, low carb, healthy fats diet. And I feel like I'm 3 years out from diagnosis and I feel fabulous. I'm on absolutely nothing. There's been no ongoing medication support or anything at this point. I do blood work every 3 months to make sure that my CA-125, which is the cancer marker, that it stays down, and it has not budged in 3 years. So, and it's low, very low, and that's perfect. That's so once you get to 5 years, that basically your chance of recurrence is pretty much passed, and you have about the same chance of getting cancer as anybody else in the general population. So yeah, so I'm at 3 years. It's all good.
Well, keep me posted because I want to know. But you know, the food as fuel, thinking of cells, thinking at that cellular level. You know, we are here on the Moving Through Menopause podcast, and what you just said then about things that influence our food decisions. You know, and for me, menopause has just been enough for me to have a bit of a review about, you know, what's going on with my body, because honestly, some things that I used to eat without any trouble at all of a sudden decide that my insides are rebelling, and it's all going horribly wrong. So, you know, like you, I've kind of gravitated towards the lower carbohydrate approach, and I mean, I actually found dairy is really bothersome. So that's a bit of a blow. You know, you talk about eating heavy cream, and I could just about start to drool at the thought of it. But
yep. Yeah. And you know, I don't personally have much of a sweet tooth. I never have. I've always had more of a creamy tooth. A bit of a salt tooth, but mostly a creamy tooth. And you know, like I say, I've never met a cheese I didn't like ever. And cheese and crackers are my comfort food. I mean, I've eaten them all my life and still do. But I have low carb alternatives to crackers, and they're what makes me happy. You know, I've tried going dairy free. I've done like the Whole30 diet restriction type things and stuff, but the dairy aspect of it, I found, did not make any difference to me personally. It didn't change my weight or my digestion or anything. All it did was make me unhappy because I wasn't getting my cheese and I wasn't getting, you know, milk in my coffee. And I don't care what anyone says, but nut juice is not milk. And it just doesn't meet the same physiological or emotional needs. At least it doesn't for me.
No, well, no, I can testify to that. But unfortunately, my digestive system definitely, if I did have it inadvertently or just think it, you know, maybe on this occasion it'll be okay, and invariably it's not. So,
no. We're also unique. That's what makes us so interesting, but it's also what makes it complicated, is that you need to know, and you need to be in touch with your body, because a lot of us are not. And that's where the whole ovarian diagnosis thing comes in, is they call ovarian cancer the cancer that whispers, because the symptoms, you know, your ovaries are buried so deep inside you that the symptoms are really nondescript. They tend to be things like bloating, possibly constipation, early satiety, or in other words, all of a sudden you can't eat as much as you used to. You know, just things that we as women just kind of go, oh, well, you know, it's just us, it's menopause, or it's my period, or it's whatever, you know, it's stress. And then we don't pay attention to ourselves and those little niggling things. So I'm here to tell you, pay attention to the little niggling things. Like, you need to be in tune with your own body, just like you are with the dairy, and know what works, know what doesn't. And listen to it. And if you have concerns, investigate it, because like I say, 75% of the people that are diagnosed with ovarian cancer are diagnosed at stage 3 or 4 when there's metastasis, and it's really difficult to treat. So it's considered a pretty serious, or, you know, fairly deadly cancer because of that. It's not obvious. Your ovaries aren't like your boobs. They're not sticking out the front, where it's easy to find a lump or something. Right. So
so that is an important message for us to finish on, really, that if in doubt, get it checked out, and don't put up and shut up.
No.
Your body's changing, but there's no harm in going to the doctor and just getting the thumbs up. There's no harm in that at all.
Doctors have trained fingers that can feel for things, and an ultrasound is a really non-invasive process. I mean, even an intravaginal ultrasound is really not that invasive a process. It's not that big a deal. Nobody's poking you with much of anything, well, you get poked, but nothing below the skin. And it's worth it for the peace of mind.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey, and your book with us today. It's been lovely to chat with you and meet you. Thank you so much for your time.
You too. And thank you. Hello to the UK and all your listeners over there. It's really wonderful to make new friends internationally.
Oh, absolutely. I love that about this. If there's anything good come out of this pandemic, this is it. The fact that we can be together virtually anywhere in the planet, pretty much. So thank you.
And the book is available on the UK Amazon too. So
yes, that's right. And I'll be sharing that. Yeah, definitely on my page. And I'm definitely going to be reading the end of your book, because I know I've read the beginning part and I'm going to be reading the end of it. So thank you again so much. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, and same to you. My day is still midday. It's just
midday.
Noon here. So
well, you've got a bit left, and I'm off to teach Pilates. So wish me luck.
Have a wonderful class.
Thank you. Take care now. Bye.